Chaps, welcome back to SJMMA. In today's video we're doing a breakdown of UFC 309. Now, I usually veer away from these kind of videos because a lot of people make them and it's not particularly original content, but there's a lot on this card that I want to talk about, so I thought I'd make an exception and make this breakdown video. Let's crack on. We are going to start with the main event, the highly anticipated main event, and that will be the bulk of the video, to be honest, because this is the number one talking point on the card, as it should be. Jon Jones against Stipe Miocic for the UFC heavyweight title. Now, you've already read the title of the video, people. You know the angle I'm coming at from in this entry. Stipe's got a chance, and it's a lot bigger than a lot of you blokes give him credit for. All the way throughout his UFC career, especially as he rose up the ranks and got into the championship picture and then obviously became the champion in his own right, Stipe Miocic has been undervalued and underrated by most people, including me at some points, I'll be honest. Why that is, I'm not 100% sure. It probably has something to do with the demeanour of the man and his fighting style, maybe. He's not the most exciting figure on the microphone, and in terms of his style, he keeps things very fundamental. He's fantastic at the basics. He doesn't really veer away from that, but he's very effective when he uses them well, which he normally does. So that could be an element of why some people have always overlooked him. I don't know. But the obvious elephant in the room here is inactivity and father time. He's into his 40s. We've not seen him since UFC 260, where he suffered a devastating knockout loss to Francis Ngannou, as we know. That was early 2021. It's now the back end of 2024. 3.5 years plus since we've seen Stipe Miocic inside a UFC octagon in a competitive way. So, there's obviously question marks over that. I mean, Jon Jones had similar before his fight with Ciryl Gane, and that was made into a big thing in the build-up of that fight, and rightfully so. Stipe's in that same boat, but Jones himself hasn't fought for 18 months since Ciryl Gane, so he's fought twice in about 5 years, 4.5 maybe. I have to say though, people, to an extent I understand why Stipe Miocic is such a big underdog going into his fight with Jon Jones. I do get it. I would make him an underdog as well. I'm not saying that I'm going to pick him to beat Jon Jones, but what I am saying is I give him a real chance, and I'll tell you why. Ciryl Gane thought the best way to try and beat Jon Jones was have a technical kickboxing match with him, which was completely the wrong idea. I know that's what Ciryl Gane does, it's his bread and butter, but if you're fighting a guy who's long enough and decent enough on the feet to go with you and has brilliant takedown entries, you're in trouble if you try and make that work. I know that MMA math is not something we should really follow, but if you look at Ciryl Gane, he got dominated in the grappling by Francis Ngannou, and Francis Ngannou got dominated in the grappling in his first fight with Stipe Miocic. Now, I know that's not how you should look at the sport, I get that, but it's just something to remember. The ability to both offensively and defensively grapple is miles better with Stipe than it ever was with Ciryl Gane. Not that I expect Stipe to offensively grapple with Jon Jones. That would be a shock. One thing Stipe's really good at is kind of finding the balance in between composure and aggression. He's able to stay on balance and present in the moment in a scrap, which he showed against Alistair Overeem and Junior Dos Santos, but he also has the ability to read things quite well, like he did in the first fight with Francis. Another example. If I'm Jon Jones, I want to be either all the way in or all the way out in this fight with Miocic, because if I'm all the way out, I can try my best to control the tempo, I can use my kicks, my teeps, my low kicks. If he's all the way in and he comes crashing in, he's got great Muay Thai, good elbows and good sweeps as well. Really good entries if he's right up close to him. If I'm Stipe, I want to be in boxing range, mid-range. Stipe kind of needs to be close enough to Jones to kind of take away his really good kicks and kind of stop him from switching stances and kind of controlling tempo. But he doesn't want to be too close. If he's too close, he'll get caught with elbows and knees, and he's easier for Jones to get a hold on and try and take down. In mid-range, in boxing range, he's not got too much to worry about with Jones, I don't think. Jon Jones is rightfully known as one of the most well-rounded mixed martial artists that we have on offer on the roster at the moment. But if there is a weakness, if there is a weak point in his overall game, I would say it's probably his boxing. He's not an awful boxer. He's better than most of the people on the roster. But if I'm Stipe, it's in boxing range where I want to be. It's where I can do the most damage. It's where he has the biggest advantage. The challenge of trying to beat Jones, it becomes increasingly difficult if I'm Stipe Miocic and I'm either caught on the outside or I'm always way too far in and effectively smothering my own work. If he gets into that cycle, he hasn't got a hoot, to be honest. So to summarise, I am saying that Jon Jones will beat Stipe, but if Stipe is going to win, which I believe he could, he has to always be in a position where he can hurt Jones and the threat of Jones coming back at him is as negated as it can be. If he can stay in that range and piece Jones up for a bit, it could get very tasty. Co-main event, Charles Oliveira versus Michael Chandler 2 in the lightweight division. This is very much I'm sorry that Conor was a twat, Michael. I'm sorry you wasted 2 years of your career. Have a favourable matchup in a big time. Spot on a massive pay-per-view. That's what this is. Chandler has done nothing in the octagon to warrant this in any way. If I'm a Dan Hooker, or even a Max Holloway that's now officially moving up to lightweight, I'd be looking at Oliveira thinking, I've earned that, I'll have a bit of that. But Chandler's got it, for reasons mainly outside the cage. As I'm sure you all know, this is a rematch of their UFC 262 lightweight title bout. It was a vacant belt after the retirement of Khabib. Now, Mike had a very good first round. Unfortunately, he was then finished in the second. One of the great things about Oliveira is, well, it's not great that he gets hurt a lot. I mean, Chandler dropped him, Poirier dropped him, Gaethje dropped him. Because he's so good off of his back, if you drop Charles Oliveira, the likelihood of you jumping into his guard is very low. So he can almost use that fear, like in his opponents, to take the time to recover. It's very clever. Watching Michael Chandler is incredibly frustrating. He's got all the physical attributes and a hell of a lot of experience. He's so muscle bound, he's so dangerous early, he's explosive. He hits pretty hard, he's obviously got great wrestling base, but he makes so many fundamental errors. I mentioned earlier how great Stipe Miocic is at almost kind of balancing aggression and composure. Mike's all aggression, no composure. He's kind of always been that way if you watch his Bellator fights, but you would expect a man who's nearing 40 to be able to read a fight a bit better. But if you ask me, Chandler is here for a good time and not a long time. He wants to be a company man, entertain the fans while he sees out his career, which is great for the sport. He's had some great fights in the UFC already, but if he could just be a little bit more, I suppose, kind of sweet and subtle and a bit more of a thinking fighter, he could have had more success in the UFC. He could have very easily beat Charles Oliveira first time round and become lightweight champion. I think these two are both at stages in their career where if they do lose badly, we could see them hang up the gloves, especially Chandler. I think if Chandler gets hurt badly or just subbed double quickly, we could see him retire. Oliveira, I think, has got another year or two left in him, regardless of what happens here. Charles Oliveira is quite an overwhelming favourite in this fight, and I'm going to go with him quite convincingly because if there is a word that I could use to describe Mr. Charles Oliveira, it would be crafty. He seems to find a way. If you're not elite, if you're not one of the best lightweights we've ever seen, like an Islam Makhachev, Arman Tsarukyan may go on to be that. If you're not at that very, very top level, he'll find a way to beat you. Chandler is very much your quintessential, muscly wrestler. He is incredibly explosive. He'll be very dangerous in the first 5-10 minutes of the fight, but every minute that goes by, his danger directly onto Charles Oliveira, it lowers significantly as the minutes go on. Oliveira can sub you with 10 seconds left. He can catch you with a kick with 10 seconds left. He's not as muscle bound. He keeps his stamina better. It's just biology, that. So I'm going with Charles Oliveira. I'm going to go with the mid-round TKO, I think. Next, we're going to move on to the feature bout, which is the next outing for Bo Nickel against Mr. Paul Craig. Now, as a UK man, a big fan of Paul Craig. Love a bit of bear chew, but yeah. Unfortunately, as much as I understood why he moved down to £185, I think it was the wrong decision. I think even if you lose a couple of fights, if you've got a win over Ankalaev and a win over Jamal Hill, your name still has weight in a division, regardless of if you've lost a couple up there. It doesn't matter. The level of technique in a mixed martial arts weight class goes up as the weight comes down. Light heavyweights are much more technical everywhere than heavyweights. And then you've got middleweights to light heavyweights, which is one of the biggest jumps, I think. If you put an elite middleweight in the 205-pound weight class, you'd see a completely different level of technique. Of course, there's physicality that you need to see, but it's just natural. The larger you are, the more that you rely on your size. The smaller you are, the more technical you are. I'm not entirely sold on Bo Nickel. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a fraud check at some point in the next 18 months. But I don't think Paul Craig is the bloke to do it. The one thing Paul Craig does have, though, is obviously Bo Nickel is a fantastically trained wrestler. And the fundamentals of wrestling, nobody can beat him on. Because Paul Craig's submission game is so unorthodox, there is a chance he could Ankalaev him and catch him with something. But I'm pretty sure Bo will be well aware of that and will be training to try and avoid that. But to give Bo some credit, his striking is actually quite good. Somewhat underrated. I think he'll try and use a bit of that against Paul Craig, show he can strike as well, but however he wants to, he will finish Paul Craig in the first round. I think it's a disgrace that this fight is on a card where people have to pay extra for, because, I mean, Viviane Araújo against Karine Silva is okay if you like watching women do jiu-jitsu, which may be a fetish for some of you, I don't know, but I think Silva's going to win by submission. We'll move on. I'm really excited about the future of Mauricio Huffy. I think he was brilliant on the Contender Series. He starched Jamie Malarkey earlier in the year, looked great in that fight as well. Jon Top's a relatively sort of late notice sort of opponent. He's lost his last two in the UFC. This is basically just another win for Huffy. He'll knock him out in the first round. If he gets to the second round, he's done well, the Peruvian, but there we go. But honestly, keep an eye on Huffy. He could do good things. And we'll quickly run through the prelims as well, beautiful people. And the headline of the prelims is Jonathan Martinez against Marcus McGee. Obviously, Martinez lost against Jose Aldo in Brazil earlier in the year. Nothing wrong with losing to Jose Aldo. There's no shame in it, but there is shame in hugging him against the cage for 3 whole rounds. I'm looking at you, Mario Batista, and I'm looking at you, fucking Marabi, pair of space cadets. But I think Martinez has got too much for Marcus McGee. He's got more ways to win, I believe, so I think he'll get it done over 3 rounds. Chris Weidman is back in action in the Big Apple, his home state. It's great to see him back. He's fighting Eric Anders, who's another kind of veteran of the sport, I suppose you could say, in his own right. He's never been anywhere near the level of what Weidman was back in his day, but he's been kind of logging around for a while. He's definitely a gatekeeper for a certain part of the middleweight division. He's a gatekeeper, and if you can get a good win over him, it's another gatekeeper like a Gerald Meerschaert, somebody like that, and then you get towards the rankings. That's kind of what I see Eric Anders as right now. First thing I want to say is, Chris Weidman, keep your bloody fingers to yourself, because Bruno Silva will find you. He's not happy with you at all. He wants your blood, mate. But more importantly, Weidman's got to retire after this, surely. It's another fight, very, very close to home for Chris Weidman. He's had a brilliant career. The way he beat Anderson Silva, when Anderson Silva was, in quotation marks, the Anderson Silva, the Spider at his best, that alone is a legacy. But he then went on to defend the middleweight title, hangs it up, gets in the Hall of Fame, lovely new jacket, sorted. I think Eric Anders is borderline pants at this point in his MMA career. I'm surprised he's still knocking about in the UFC, but I just have a feeling that he'll beat Weidman. I just think he's slightly more athletic and explosive at the points of the career that they're both at. I think he's probably good enough as a defensive grappler to keep it standing for long enough to hurt Chris Weidman and finish him. That's how I see it. And another legend will be in the octagon just before Chris Weidman, Jim Miller. Another man very closer to his own neck of the woods in that part of the world. Fighting Damon Jackson, who used to be a featherweight. How can I put this nicely? Damon Jackson is very chinny, and he's got a shit hairline, but that doesn't affect his fighting. But he is very chinny. I mean, fucking Dan Ige knocked him out. Who does it pretty hard, Dan Ige, but not like that. I mean, I'm not being funny. He's not Ilia Topuria, do you know what I mean? And we've seen old Jim Miller get a lovely little highlight reel knockout at the Apex not too long ago. So I'm actually going to go with the Jim Miller knockout, because I think if at lightweight, if you hit Damon Jackson with one of Chase Hooper's best shots, he might go down. So I'm going to go with the Jim Miller first round knockout. Why not? Next up, a heavyweight fight. Marcin Tybura against John Atta Denise. Now, obviously, Denise was supposed to fight Derek Lewis earlier in the month. He had to pull out for undisclosed reasons. My guess is he was found under the counter at Tim Hortons with a 12-pack of double glazed. Do you know what I mean? I cannot tell you how much of an asset it is for a heavyweight to have like actual fast twitch movement, which this bloody Brazilian definitely does. It gives you such an advantage over most heavyweights who just don't have that. So I'm going to say he knocks out Marcin Tybura pretty early, to be honest. On the card, we've also got Mickey Gall. Yeah, he apparently he's still kicking about against Ramis Brahimaj. I hope I got that right. If I didn't, please let me know. I'm trying to work on my pronunciations. Mickey Gall is 7-6 in his MMA career. And his first fight in the UFC was, it was actually Mike Jackson. And then he fought CM Punk, which is probably his best win. I mean, he did beat Sage Northcutt when he was kind of hyped, but that was a while ago now. That was like, I think that was on an ESPN card, an early one. It may have been the one Van Zandt versus Waterson, or it may have even been Cejudo Dillashaw. One of those two, I think. That was ages ago. And he's fighting a guy in Brahimaj, again, I hope I got that right, who I just think is more on the ascension than an ageing, slightly shite Mickey Gall. So I'm going to say he wins, because that just makes sense, no? The second fight of the entire card is actually on paper quite a good one, especially for me. There's a bit of British flavour in there. It's old Basil Hafez against Oban Elliott. A lot of you people may not even know who Basil Hafez is. Well, do you remember when JDM was supposed to fight Sean Brady and he got cancelled, I believe it was twice? And after the second one, about 3 weeks later, he fought on an Apex card, just randomly out of nowhere, and he just fought some unranked bloke. That said unranked bloke was Basil Hafez, and to be fair, he did alright against JDM. Neither of these two chaps are coming off great wins. They are both coming off wins, but, I mean, Preston Parsons is okay, and you already know how I feel about Mickey Gall. So, you know, neither of them are particularly knocking on the door of the rankings, but a big win here could really shift them up, and I'm going to go with Basil Hafez. I'm going to go against the Brit. I know, crazy, isn't it? And we'll finish off with the first fight on the card, which is Veronica Hardy against Eduarda Moura. Now, Veronica Hardy has made a bit of a habit of always being the first fight on a pay-per-view and being handed fights against people who are kind of maybe could do something if they can get a few wins and just beating them. I mean, Juliana Miller is a perfect example. I mean, she won tough and then she got beat up by Veronica Hardy. I wouldn't be surprised if the same thing happens again. I've not seen a lot of Eduarda Moura, to be honest, but I'm just going to pick Veronica Hardy because I don't really care about the fight that much, to be totally honest. And lads, we are donezo. That will wrap up my UFC 309 breakdown. Obviously, a big emphasis on the fights at the top of the bill, but we've had a bit of a chit chat about the ones down the card as well. Hope you enjoyed. Enjoy the fights this weekend. If you're in the UK, get your 20 quid out. No pirating, right? Don't be a dickhead. I'll see you later.